Hello,
Hello,
I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and here we are at the end of season 3.
Crazy.
Crazy. Yeah, it's a pretty radical end to everything that's been building throughout the season,
Yeah, totally.
and it's a really interesting note that they leave it off on, I find.
Yeah.
I find that they're doing some interesting things just in terms of what a season can be and where it leads to.
Yeah, but also what they're setting up for
Absolutely.
next season and like the tensions they've already kind of established that we might see, may or may not see
Yeah.
next season.
Yeah, who knows? We don't know.
Yeah. We've only
never
seen this show
yeah.
a lot of times. Yeah, so maybe we'll say just before we start this episode that we're going to take a tiny little break after this episode.
Yeah, so we're going to finish season 3. It's almost Christmas time right now. In fact, Christmas is tomorrow.
Yes.
When this comes out.
Yes.
It's not quite that right now.
But I think we're going to take a little break and come back in the new year
Yeah.
with season 4.
Yeah.
The time
so
kind of
we've
worked
been
out.
doing 2 a week, and we're just going to take a tiny break around the holidays, and we'll be back very
I
soon.
like that
with
we
season
keep
4.
calling it a tiny break.
Tiny break.
Yeah.
You know.
Anyways, so for those of you who are looking for it, which are
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you,
But we appreciate you.
we're gonna make it happen. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this episode.
Yeah, so I mean, what you were saying is interesting. I think that the function of this season finale is interesting. In terms of the drama has actually kind of the drama has kind of unfolded in some ways in the penultimate episode, just in terms of like setting up everything. As things play out in this episode, it's kind of a downer. Like I feel like we're just like moving down. It's this kind of like tragic episode where
Yeah, nothing good is happening.
it's dramatic, but in a way it's definitely not exciting, or it's not feeling like a payoff. It's actually feeling like this just kind of like downward trajectory, and while things are wrapping up, we just kind of feel like it's a lot more of the same, and actually the way that people respond to tragedy is actually pretty tragic in and of itself.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of like weeping. It's hard to like, again, we don't see that often in this show, like an episode full of weeping.
Yeah.
This is maybe the closest we get to it.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of tears, from lots of characters.
Yeah. And then also, like you said, the setup, I think, is really interesting, and they're very efficient about how they do it. But it's actually, like, incredible how they set up what's going to happen in the next season.
Yeah.
Without even knowing what happens in the next season, you have an idea of where they're going.
Right. Yeah, like the introduction of Danielle, for example. Or
Yeah,
I forget what her real name's, Deborah. I forgot that there was, like, just one scene with the FBI and then one scene with her and Adriana.
Yeah. And also, but like the choice to include that in the finale of season 3,
I
as
know,
to like
I
include
know.
that at the beginning of season 4 is actually really fascinating. The fact that they use the season finale to introduce all these things that will be played off of later.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, like they don't have that much time to work with in a season finale. Like that's like valuable real estate. And so for them to kind of have an episode that kind of just wraps up loose ends, but then also connects things into where it's going.
Yeah.
Gives us foreshadowing of what we can expect.
Well, it's almost part of the vibe of the show, though, too, that there's, like, always something looming.
Totally.
Right? Like, and so, like, there was a lot of talk in this episode, again, in a short episode, like, oh, the RICO trial's coming up, right? And, like, all of a sudden this, like, a lot of focus on Junior, right? Who's recovered and now, like, really back in his role as boss. He's done with his house arrest, right? At least for now. And we don't get any, like, there's no drama associated with that yet, except for that really funny moment of him and Bobby coming to the funeral.
Slapstick routine.
Yeah, and then leaving and going back in their car. But there's nothing like, we're left just hanging on that too, right? So I think it is just part of the whole vibe of like, there's always like, there's always the next person to come in the door.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many examples of that too, of like characters that they are kind of insinuating what's to come. So yeah, like Junior, we know that he's now off house arrest.
Yeah.
We know that this RICO trial is looming. We have Polly, who's upset. We have him playing Johnny Sack playing off of him, showing that there could be some kind of relationship there.
He's the nosiest guy.
Yeah,
like doesn't he have stuff to do in New York? Like I don't know why he has all this time. He seems like he's an important guy.
You'd think he would be busy.
No kidding. Like
you would think that the underboss of one of the 5 families. Would
yeah,
be.
Why does he have all this time to just be like hanging out? Making trouble.
It's a great question.
I've never like noticed that in past seasons. Like, why is he always around?
Nonetheless, we can expect some things from him.
Probably.
Also, so we have like, you know, Polly's upset, and we also have Ralphie like kind of in a position of increased power based on what he's bringing in from the Esplanade. So kind of like setting him up perhaps for like conflict between him and Polly or him and Tony.
Also setting him up to be with Janice, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a quick scene, but seeing, like, Janice kind of falling into him and sitting on his lap at the very end there, there's something a little strange about that, considering right now Ralphie is with Rosalie.
Now, when he referred to, he said it, like, really quickly. He was like, I was at my Gumar's house all night, with Rosalie and her grief. I can't sleep. Right? When he goes to the sit-down with Tony and Sil and Polly. Was he referring to Janice or is he referring to someone else?
I'm not sure you could prove it. Possibly. Yeah. I don't know.
It's a pretty quick transition in that, if not. I mean, even if so, but.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
Janice has great taste in men also.
Amazing. Always the best people.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing great.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because that's not what this episode is about, but then it functions that way in this very kind of like underhanded way. They're able to sneak in all this information about what we can expect, and they really don't use that much dialogue to get there. It's actually pretty amazing.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. We also, like, again, with last episode and this episode, I guess, we're left with Carmela kind of in a different place than she's been too, right?
Yeah.
Like... we have this really big family tension in this last episode with the stuff going on with AJ.
Yeah.
And that leaves us kind of wondering, like, where this will pick up, right? Like, what will happen in the meantime.
Yeah.
You know, we're still not really even settled on where he's going to school, right? Because now we're saying he can't go to the military, right? So that's left unresolved, even though it's a big focus of the episode, like getting him into a school. Right?
Yeah.
Or like dealing with his expulsion, right?
Yeah.
But we're left kind of just like hanging on that.
Yeah.
We're left with a very dramatic scene with Meadow. So like both things with the kids, like you wonder, like, again, like what that's leading to. Because clearly like the focus on them is linked to Jackie Jr.
Yeah.
And Tony, you know, Tony's focus on them following the death of Jackie.
Yeah.
But we have this very dramatic scene with Meadow that maybe we want to talk about because I thought it was really interesting.
Well, I think that's something that this episode really puts out there is who is Meadow and who is AJ and who will they become? And I think that like they are becoming adults, and the question is starting to be, as this show matures and passes through time, who will they be? How far apart from the mob world will they be, and will they be able to kind of create something different for themselves or not? And I think that they're examining it in different ways for those two characters. You know, for AJ, he's obviously having some bad behavior. When Tony's talking to Melfi, he makes it abundantly clear that he does not think that he could operate within the mob world. With Meadow, it's interesting. Like that last scene is really fascinating. So like Tony's angry, which he is for the whole episode. Like he's very kind of like blustery and kind of like dominating people to kind of control situations.
Yep.
But Meadow then turns and goes face to face to him in a way where I feel like he doesn't typically get confronted.
Yeah.
And she says, "This is such bullshit," and then runs across the street through traffic, which I feel is linked for sure to the last episode when she's running through traffic again.
That street looks almost the same as the street in the last episode.
I feel like there's definitely,
because we've been on that street and we know what it looks like.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a bit of a link between this season 3 finale and then the finale of the final season.
Maybe we'll have to remember to talk about that.
We'll come back to that. Yeah, but I mean, what's interesting though is like there's a lot of examples of Meadow dealing with how close or how far will she be from the family? And there's a lot of talk about it. You know, talk about Meadow being in Colombia.
Yeah.
Being in New York, being
talking
distant.
about it to Melfi.
Yeah.
Like,
and there's these kind of like mixed messages, like even like small things, like she's even like drinking these cosmopolitans and stuff. I feel like there's an aspect of her, like Carmela has talked about wanting her to take everything that the city has to offer, wants her to kind of like be a part of that world.
Yeah.
And in some ways she is and has changed throughout the course of the series to this point. But then there's this really telling moment where she's talking to Jackie's sister.
Yeah.
And, she has some lines like, frankly, the fact that you would say this in front of an outsider is like unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Or she's like, a little loyalty.
Yeah. Which is like, that actually is like a hard left.
Tony expression.
That's like a hard left back to the mentality of where she comes from.
Yeah.
And I think that for Meadow, that's one of the big questions for her character is, can she escape this world?
Yeah.
And it's a constant back and forth. And I think, it's interesting because like Tony's even talking about it in therapy, similarly to how he was talking about how AJ couldn't operate in that world. Mm-hmm. He talks about Meadow and says, the best thing she can do is get away from me.
Yeah.
And Melfi says, I think I understand. And I think that we can understand as viewers too.
Yeah.
And I think that I have to agree with that. I think that if Meadow found a way to get away from the family, then that's probably her best hope, for her own well-being.
Probably.
As I feel like almost everybody that we see in this world is. The further they can get away from Tony Soprano and his orbit, the more healthy they can be.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see like characters who are being pulled back in, right? Like, well, not back in, but like we haven't seen Adriana in a while, right? And so like, again, like we were saying with, this episode setting some things up too, like it allows us to focus on some of these different characters and to examine them as well. And I think like, obviously we'll still continue to unpack the main characters like Meadow and, what we were talking about. But we do really see like how it's hard. I mean, like how possible is it for Meadow to escape, right? Even like New York isn't far enough away. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe she should have gone to Berkeley.
Probably. Yeah.
And then AJ, I mean, that's actually like in many ways like kind of the focal point of the hour. But who will AJ be? Who is he becoming? Yeah. And obviously there's some very heavy-handed connections between him and Jackie Jr.
Yeah.
And like one of the very first scenes is on AJ, and then there's like this kind of like edit that goes straight to Jackie Jr. in the projects, and there's other ones too. Like there's one where there's a scene of AJ, and then there's an edit that goes straight to the coffin, or maybe they're talking about AJ.
Yeah,
but it goes straight to the coffin. They make it very clear that everybody is concerned about AJ becoming like Jackie Jr. Yeah. I mean, even Tony says to AJ, like after both of them find out that Jackie died, which is
he says,
must be pretty. You see,
yeah,
which actually must be pretty traumatic to AJ because he knew Jackie well. Like he was a bit of a role model for him. He taught him football. They had a good relationship.
Yeah.
And for Tony to have that lack of compassion and empathy to kind of like throw that at him at that moment is problematic for his development. And it's interesting because then shortly after when AJ's talking to Meadow, he says, "Oh yeah, that's not it. He was doing a drug deal. He's like dead."
I know. I wrote that down too.
So
he's like dead. Yeah,
obviously the issues with Tony Soprano in terms of his
parenting.
His parenting and his rearing of AJ manifests itself in AJ's behavior as well.
Yeah. It is. We like don't see Tony actually like parenting all that often. Like
no,
we don't see him all that engaged in conversations like the one that we have today, right? And we definitely see that there are these really key differences between Tony and Carmela in how they want to raise children or the vision they have for their children's future.
Yeah.
Even, right? Like, again, they both kind of say different things. Like Carmela says, like, I want you to take advantage of all the things out there, right?
Yeah.
But the stuff with AJ, right? Like Carmela really does believe in like, having, listening to people's emotions and, this might be a cry for help, right?
Yeah.
Like she really wants to see, I guess, the good in people or like at least the potential of people to be a certain way, and she kind of has to see that for herself also, right? Like that there's not like there's no fate, you know, or like a death sentence associated with it, that there is this capacity to escape or not get trapped in it, right? But I think Tony says on the like Tony's opinions are completely different, right? Like even he says like, oh, he has that putrid fucking disgusting soprano gene or whatever. He sees it as like that it is almost in some ways like this, like you can't escape your genetics, right? Like that it's this sentence that is on them, and I think like that's what he's really worried about in AJ. That it's like an inescapable, like no matter what they do, that this is just AJ.
Yeah, definitely. And then, you know, like this aspect of going to military school, like the question that kind of lingers over them as parents and for us as viewers is like, is that the right decision for him?
Yeah.
And I think it's problematic like anything else in this world.
I love the scenes with the whatever captain, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Lieutenant.
Mr. McGuy.
Yeah. The guy who's in charge. I love when he's like, what's 0530? And he was like 5:30 in the morning. And AJ's like like that's his only response to the whole like spiel that he has. But yeah, like I don't know, maybe that is a good place for AJ. I don't know. I don't think like the thing about it is like I think like training him to be a soldier, it's like it's kind of like, I don't know, like Polly was a soldier in the war too, right? Like we kind of we could see how that could just still lead him into this same path in some ways too.
And I think that like Tony is feeling very confident about this decision, but I feel like he is exhibiting like a lack of understanding of what AJ needs. He's actually thinking about what he wants. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of things that reflect what he values as opposed to what he should be realizing that AJ needs in his life. And there's even like there's little things like, I mean, obviously Tony has talked about being a soldier and the importance of being a soldier, and I think that perhaps like that's an opportunity for him to have AJ kind of like engage in that kind of worldview without being a part of the mob still. Yep. And above and beyond that, like there was a really interesting connection where the junior cadet who's showing around AJ, who he's kind of passed off to, who like kind of like looks at him with this like demeaning look. Yeah. But there's that talk about chain of command. Yeah. Kind of in multiple different points of the episode. You know, Tony talks to Ralphie about chain of command. It's very important in our thing. Then Carmela talks about like he's going to be getting orders from, you know, people like slightly older than him that are blowing up frogs or whatever. Yeah. But this idea that AJ then would be a part of the same kind of hierarchical structure that Tony is a part of. Yep. And it's problematic. And to see that, like, I mean, Carmela has points that these are all like kind of like complicated issues, but I'm not actually sure that that's actually what AJ should be doing. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if there's part of Tony who would like AJ to be like him in some way. Like, I think so.
You know, I think like, because, you know, you can really see like his focus, his emphasis on like trying to help Jackie Jr. because of who his dad was. Like, that there, you know, hopefully for him, there would be this, like, that Jackie Jr. would have been what Jackie Sr. would have wanted him to be, right? But I don't know, like the way he treats Christopher, like, I don't know. I have to imagine that there's at least part of Tony that would like it if AJ was like a competent guy who he could see like passing on the family business to or whatever. Right. But he doesn't really say that. I don't know. I just like that's just my kind of imagination maybe. But I have to imagine that's part of it too. Like it's like this disappointment, but then like also like, you know, wanting him to get something else or get out of it. I don't know. Or escape that Soprano gene. Yeah. No, totally. Like Tony talks about how he didn't have a choice. Yeah. Right? Right. But he wants AJ too. Yeah. It's interesting when he's at Verbum Day too, and the like headmaster is saying
he puts him and his friend in this position where it's a lot like a cooperation agreement, and seeing how they respond to that. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, even like the lines he's using, he's like, if you cooperate, it'll go a lot quicker. So like that's interesting just in terms of how does AJ fit into that mold? Like, what would happen to him if he was faced with that kind of pressure?
Right.
You know, like if he was in the mob world, like how would he respond?
Right.
And it's interesting.
I don't think very well.
Well, I think it's really interesting because like the question in this episode, and as the series goes on, amongst many other questions, but one of them is like, who is AJ? And AJ is an interesting one because he actually doesn't really crack. He's not really concerned. Like, he has this borderline nihilistic streak where he just kind of like does stuff without thinking and doesn't care.
Yep.
And doesn't really reflect on it. But even like his response, he's like, well, he peed first. Like, it doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
So all that I can really take away from that is like, it's not that he is brave and like holds it up and like kind of, you know, like make sure that nothing's going to happen. It's not that he's like what Tony would think of as like cowardly and just like snapped to get himself out of trouble. It's actually like he's weird and kind of stupid or something.
Yeah.
Like he just kind of he has like, strange considerations. Like he's interested in weird parts of it, and I don't think he kind of like grapples with the importance of this on his life.
No, I don't think at all. But yeah, no, you're right. Like he's not.
But he's also not like cowardly.
Yeah,
in this situation.
That's interesting. He's also like he's an emotional character too, and I think like that scene where he has on his new uniform, right before he has the panic attack, and he just like his face, like he's so upset, and you can see how his parents' words really like impact him, and he starts to cry, and he says he looks like a total jerkoff.
What do you think? Do you think he looks like a total jerkoff?
I mean, with the helmet, he certainly does.
I don't know. Carmela said if she wasn't married already, she'd marry him. Which is
parents are the worst.
That's a weird thing to say.
Parents are gross.
I mean, parents shouldn't say that.
Yeah, they do though. Yeah. No, I think like the other involvement with Tony this episode is a lot with the situation with Ralphie, and I think it's pretty interesting how he manipulates Ralphie into finally you know calling calling this hit or whatever you want to say. He never outright says like I need you to do this.
In fact, he only kind of outright says like, yeah, you said you were going to give him a pass.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
but his intentions are clear.
Yeah, it's funny, and it's funny how we like see Vito a couple times in the episode leading up to that, right? Like it's funny that it's Vito who ends up doing it. But yeah, like it's creepy how Tony can be so like, how do I say it? Like he can make some people do exactly what he wants without coming across that way, but he can't really do that with his kids.
Right.
He's not able. He doesn't have control over that domain. He does to quite a large degree have control over his mob domain. Yeah. He's, you know, like there's issues, but he's pretty much in control.
He's a pretty effective leader, yeah.
In his family, not so much. You know, he'd like it to be this new regime or whatever he was saying, right? But like, it's just not. Like, he's not in control there. Yeah. I
mean, he also doesn't like invest the time that's necessary to make that a reality. No. I mean, his whole existence. I mean, even if you think about like when Christopher is getting made and he says, you know, like this comes first, this comes before family, this comes before everything, right? So there's a reason why he's able to kind of function better in that world. What I feel about this episode is like, it's a tragic episode. Like everything that happens is tragedy, you know, and like AJ getting expelled and this situation of him with the military school, and then, you know, and then we find out that Jackie has been killed, and we see him get killed. We see him get killed. What I really feel like it does, and I think that this relates to the title Army of One, which I think has multiple kind of meanings in this episode, but I feel like it's an episode where it establishes that everybody is really isolated and that they're really on their own. Yeah. And that within this tragedy, like everybody's life is kind of a tragedy. I mean, if you think about it, like pretty much all the characters, like AJ, Carmela, Meadow, Jackie Jr., you know, Tony, Paulie, Ralphie, all of them are completely isolated with their issues.
Yeah.
And they have nowhere to turn to. They
yeah,
have no
and
help.
nobody's on their team. Like, nobody's on their side with a lot of these issues.
No. I mean, everybody's just kind of floundering at this
Yeah.
point. And I think that this also is kind of in some ways setting up the back half of Sopranos. Like, as we leave season 3, I think that we get into this kind of... For me, I feel like the season 4 on is somewhat bleaker. Like, it's feeling like it's dying. Like, we're dying.
We're all dying.
Yeah.
But
Cue
I mean,
the existential crises that happen every time you watch
right.
the show.
I forgot how we get there. Jackie could have had Omar.
That's right. Omar from The Wire.
Yeah.
Is his friend.
I don't know what his name is in this episode.
I don't even know if they give it. Yeah. Actually, so my second note that I wrote for this is whenever there's a character that we see for the first time, I typically write their name and then an exclamation point.
Omar.
But in this episode, it says, Omar! Exclamation point. Polly's mom! Exclamation point.
I care more about Omar, but
Yeah,
he
me
doesn't
too.
show up again.
Also, calling him Omar is not particularly accurate for this episode, but
well,
that's okay.
what's the actor's name? Michael K. Williams?
Yep.
That's a lot of pressure, but...
That was a lot of pressure.
Okay.
He did it, though.
But I don't know what I was saying about that, though.
That's okay.
I just got distracted by Omar. Anyways, that's who we're talking about. The guy who Jackie is staying with, who has like a safe house kind of place with his daughter.
Yeah.
I like that character too. I wish she would come back. She was cool.
Yeah. It's also a kind of a funny Wire reference with like the playing of chess. in there.
Yeah.
But it's different. Like they handle it
Yeah.
differently. But
Such a short chess game.
yeah. No, it is interesting. And also like this idea of Jackie like kind of like flipping over the board, and I guess we just have to call him Omar at this point.
Yeah, and Omar. Yes.
And Omar is saying, like you won't learn from your mistakes and like you're done.
Yeah.
Which is he's referring to the game, but obviously both of those things refer to everything that's happened to him as a character.
Yeah. And then like his death scene is really something too, like the close zoom in on his face, right, as he's walking down that hill. It's really...
Yeah, I know it's pretty tough.
Yeah, and it does kind of also like cycle around him a little bit too, like we see him walking and then we see his close-up face and then we see him lying face down, right? So it kind of like does this full circle around
I remember how
him.
unexpected for me that was the first time.
Yeah.
There's something there too, actually. So just before, like as
Yeah.
he's in that room,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. As he's playing chess, there's this chatter of Super Bowl
Yeah.
happening in the
Yeah.
background, and there's a lot of reference to sports in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, very shortly before, when Carmela and Tony are talking, and they're actually talking specifically about Jackie and the drugs. Like Tony is reading the sports section.
Yep.
There's this talk about Super Bowl happening at multiple points. It's like. And actually, there's orange juice in between Tony and Carmela. Like in the last episode, we kind of freaked out over a shot where it's an example of like two people and something framed in between. While the orange juice, which
and they're talking about
we've
Jackie
talked about
Jr.
a lot at this point, but
Yeah.
Godfather establishes as being linked to death. They're talking about Jackie, not a good omen, particularly. But this focus on sports and that's what Tony is focused on, and the fact that the Super Bowl chatter comes up when Jackie is playing chess. I feel like it's like they say you're going to be safe here, but he's not. Like is following him.
Yeah.
And then again, I mean, throughout the episode, this focus on the Super Bowl, none of them show up to his funeral.
Yeah.
As a result of it being the busy season.
Yeah. No, I mean, we often in this show too get characters who like before they're killed, we get to see them in a slightly different way. So we do have this thing where he like tosses over the chessboard, but then we see him be, pretty endearing to Omar's daughter. Again,
he's actually pretty sweet.
Sorry, character name. Sorry, Michael K. Williams' character in The Sopranos. But yeah, he's actually like a sweet kid.
Yeah, as he was with AJ.
A sweet 22-year-old, like, and so I like that. That's kind of where we're left with him in some ways.
Yeah.
And that's and again, it kind of like we're treated or we're allowed to feel the same way that like Rosalie is feeling when she's looking at all the pictures of Jackie Jr. like when he was on the football team.
Yeah.
And like when he was like a little bit more innocent or whatever too. And so it kind of like plays with our, like it is this tragic episode. It plays with our emotions too. It's a really sad episode. The only, like, the person who gives me some hope, but also I don't know if that's, like, the right emotion to feel, is that Adriana in this episode. She's just, like, a really open person, and maybe that's, like, a little bit of naivete or whatever, or stupidity, I'm not sure. But, like, she walks into a store and, like, makes friends with somebody. You know, someone who obviously
immediately talks. I love the like Danielle's, like, the way that her face kind of, like, the way that she acts
she's
it,
like,
when she's
whoa,
already talking about Tony and the funeral. Like, it takes about, like, 8 seconds.
Yeah. But that's kind of, like, beautiful in some ways too, like that.
And helpful for the FBI.
And very helpful for the FBI. You know, like, that she, like, this is just, like, her everyday life, right? Like, when she's talking about Tony, she's not talking about, like, his involvement with the mob. She's talking about, like, how it impacts her life, right? And, like, and Christopher's life or whatever. They're, like, normal everyday issues for her. And, you know, even though, like, obviously, like, we've talked about, like, she knows what Christopher does and she's a beneficiary of Too Big Jimmy Choos and all this kind of stuff. She's still unaware enough to do that kind of stuff and to be that open with other people. Whereas Carmela is, like, really closed off, and even like Meadow's really closed off, right? Yeah. Like, again, with the loyalty thing, or, like, you know, saying things in front of outsiders. Yeah. Like, Adriana doesn't have that. No. That's and so I don't know if it's a good thing. It kind of did, like, for some reason, make me feel warm, like, compared to the rest of the episode, because it was just so, like,
depends who you're asking if it's a good thing.
No, I'm not saying, but that's the thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it's, like, so innocent or so like, you know, again, like, naive. Yeah. And it just, like, in contrast to Carmela is how I was thinking of it. Yeah. And you see, like, all the wives when the guys come back from jail, where they were for a very short period of time during the funeral. Yeah. And they all come back and everyone's happy to see them or whatever. But you see the difference in those, like, older wives as well.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of ideas still, but they're pretty kind of, like, relating to different things. Okay. So maybe I could kind of bring up some things and we can just kind of chat about them. Because I do have a number of things that I want to talk about, but they kind of, like, jump around a little bit. Which I feel like this episode, I mean, it's largely a narrative episode. I think that it's very moody. Yeah. And it's pretty thematic, but it's interesting too, like, in the way that we were talking about structure. Like, it's not a typical episode, and I think that they're actually being, in my view, I mean, somewhat revolutionary just in terms of, like, what you can do with a TV season, what you can do within this medium, because the way that they use the season finale is so fresh, I find. So some things, I mean, like, I mean, you know, just like you were talking about, like, for the way that Tony responds to this whole situation, the way that he plays it, like when Jackie Jr. calls him up front and he's saying, "Call your stepdad," like, the fact that this level of manipulation is pretty deep. Like, the way that he plays it out against Jackie and the way that he plays it out against Ralphie.
Yeah, he's manipulating everybody.
You know, saying to Ralphie, like, it's important that it happens in a timely fashion. It's just like, this is a window into who Tony is right now. Because I feel like he's kind of falling apart in this episode. Yeah. A little bit. Like, he's full of rage. Like, I feel like, I mean, he doesn't have a panic attack, AJ does, but I feel like he's, like, on the brink of something like that. Like, he's a little out of control. Yeah. He doesn't know how to deal with things. When he has the sit down, he has this almost, like, nihilistic streak, I find. Like, he doesn't really care, and he kind of cavalierly makes a ruling, and he really screws over Polly. Yeah. In favor of Ralphie, which is surprising, because typically that's somebody who he has a huge problem with. And, I mean, it's pretty clear that this is creating a lot of resentment with Polly, and there was probably more middle ground than, like, the ridiculous number that Ralphie seems to have thrown out, 5,000. I mean, it seemed ridiculous. I don't know what the going rate is for giving out codes. Yeah. For giving out codes for a safe breaking.
I don't know either. Sounds like pretty good though.
But yeah, there's something about, like, that scene too, where, like, I feel like right now at this moment Tony is, like, irritated when Jackie calls. He's just, like, very detached from all these things that are happening around him, and he's angry. Yeah. Like, he's not in a healthy place.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
which is interesting because throughout the course of the season, there have been times where he at least states and we see him as being in a good place. But what it feels like to me is as they wrap up this season, it's like it's all just coming back to the same stuff. It's just a cycle. Yeah. And there really is kind of no hope for this guy. In terms of the form of the episode, it's really interesting how they have a phone call for Tony that says it's a woman. It sounds like she's crying. Right. Or I think it's Carmela. It's Carmela. It sounds like she's crying. Which I think I was trying to remember, but there was a reference. There was a phone call saying it sounds like somebody's on the phone. They're crying. I think it might have been about Gloria. It just happened recently. But again, like there's just like a lot of tragedy. Like people are crying. Like I feel like the motion of this season has been down and everybody is just like at a tragic point. Yeah. And what's interesting about it though is that it relates to where Tony is, because like I feel like he's just getting anger from this and just kind of isolating himself and kind of becoming this army of one himself. But what's fascinating is that we expect that that's going to be about Jackie Jr., but it's not. It's about AJ being expelled, which then makes like the added, inevitability of Jackie Jr. being killed just like that much crazier. Yeah. There was some stuff with Carmela when she's talking to Meadow. And actually, she's kind of like reprimanding her when she's in bed.
They're in the car. Oh, when they're in bed.
Yeah, well, there's multiple times. It's interesting. Yeah. Like, there's a window. What was the other thing you said? Like, it's all over.
I don't know.
My words don't make any sense. Apologies. But she's talking about the first time, the Italian boogeyman, like, you're coming up with this. It's interesting. Like, we're really getting a window into who Meadow is and also who Carmela is and, like, what their belief systems are. Mm-hmm. And they're all different, and it's interesting because like now Carmela is being that kind of like protective person, and that concept of an Italian boogeyman actually goes to Richard LaPena even. Like it's an interesting concept, which is even kind of like meta because the show is getting a lot of criticism about like stereotyping Italian Americans. So there's a lot there, but I feel like the show has already dealt with that in a way where we feel like they don't give that argument that much kind of like credit. Yeah. So it's a little cheap. And actually, one of Carmela's lines really stood out to me. She says, "Whatever you're thinking, stop thinking." Yeah. So that idea of stop thinking actually is really relevant. Like, whatever you're thinking about, that this could have happened and that it's a result of mob violence. Don't think that. Just don't think, which is interesting in the context of that line of reasoning. Or how also Carmela just generally stop thinking. Yeah. Because I think that she does do that.
Yeah, of course. She has to.
These people do have to. But Meadow is not doing that at this point.
No. But then she
does.
But then in her own way she does. Yeah,
and like she actually does stop thinking, and she kind of breaks down, the reasoning that makes it, feel like a guy with see-through socks was the one who killed him.
Yeah, no, totally.
She stops thinking about it, and actually she gets protective and defensive.
Yeah. And then we have the conversation with them later in the car. Yeah. Where she's talking about like, you once told me that you have to max out the good times with the people you love, and Carmela's like, that was your dad, right? Yeah. Like,
which also is very linked to the end of this episode because that's how we ended off season 1. Yeah. And now we're back at Vesuvio, and we have another meeting of people that should be one of those. Well, it's a tragic time. It's around like the funeral, but with Junior singing, there's an aspect of like you are around the people you love. And it's like an important kind of like family time. And it's connected to what was being said at the end of the first season. Yeah.
And in that scene in the car, I think it is like another example of how like what both of the kids get from each of their parents, right? So like what's passed down to both of them and what do they have from each of their parents? Yeah. And I think like Meadow does share this emotionality with Tony and this like I don't know, like when she was like wasted and throwing bread at Junior and like singing Baby One More Time, like it's kind of like Tony when he's at his like crazy like when we saw him stumbling in the house and stuff like that and like singing a song really loudly, like it kind of reminded me of that.
Totally. I think absolutely.
And yeah, and then just like how she responds then to Carmela after that too. Like then she's like mad about it and she's like, "You're just trying to pry or something." Yeah. So anyways. Yeah.
Definitely. Interesting. Well, how about then in that finale scene with Junior singing and then turning into the different songs? What do you think about that?
I don't really know what I think about it.
I mean,
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, we have Junior's song, I mean, morphing into different songs of different languages. So
Yeah.
it starts off obviously with a very kind of like quintessential Italian song.
Yeah.
Then we're in French, Chinese, and then Spanish.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's definitely like a broadening of the perspective. There's definitely something that makes it more international.
I don't know why we're doing that.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I mean, David Chase basically gave an answer. So if you're interested, you can find it. You can look for it. I think Sopranos Autopsy even references it.
Oh yeah.
Or yeah, I think. But anyway.
I don't know. Yeah, for me, it doesn't like. I don't know. It didn't give me anything really.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think I really got anything from that. At least from my.
For me, it's like
viewing.
It's interesting in just like broadening our perspective of everything is so focused on Italian American culture, but understanding that these are universal issues and could exist in a ton of different environments.
No, just in France and China and Spain.
I think that was just a representation.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted
Yeah,
to bring it up.
perhaps. I don't know. For me, I don't know. I don't say this too much when but like sometimes the music choices in this show bother me. Sometimes I think they're excellent.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know. They make me roll my eyes a little bit sometimes.
Yeah.
Like sometimes they're just a little bit too heavy-handed or like are just picked for like a certain lyric.
Right.
And then this one, like, I don't know, like, why were these pieces of music picked from these different languages to go with this
I think
scene?
there's a reason, but yeah.
I can't figure it out.
Right.
And it didn't, like, I don't know what I was looking for, like, in the last scene of the finale. Mm-hmm. But it kind of, like, left me with a weird feeling.
Mm. It is like a pivotal. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know.
A pivotal spot. Like you would expect something of like major significance to happen there.
Yeah, or just like, or nothing of significance to happen, but like the fact that then there were these 3 different songs played while Junior's still singing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't usually get whatever it is, like non-diegetic music.
Mm-hmm.
No, or diegetic music, which is the one I want to talk about.
Diegetic is like when it happens on.
Yeah, most of the music in The
source,
Sopranos is source music.
Right.
And so we don't often get music that's not like happening around the characters, except for in the final, like in the credits, right? Or sometimes leading into the credits. You know, that's really the only time we get it. And so this stands out for me. And then again, like, so it stands out. Obviously, it's different than what we usually see, but I just can't figure out the purpose.
Right. Yeah. Well, let us know your thoughts too if you have some theories on that. Actually, one thing this is now going back, but there was one thing actually that I thought was really interesting was the Ira Fried showing up on the penile implant doctor who shows up on the TV, who we were commenting on just previously in the last episode about him actually like acting that out.
Yeah.
And how he was on set. And it's interesting because I think that it's very relevant. Like he talks about increase the length, girth of what occurred naturally. And then immediately that cuts basically to AJ walking down in his military clothing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something there. Like Tony is searching for and chasing this masculine identity that he sees that's actually, we know, is a fabrication. Like he was acting that out. And this idea of like chasing this penile enhancement or whatever is... I
like the looks that Tony and Carmela exchange during this scene.
Right.
It's really funny.
But I think, there's this like obsession to prove...
manliness.
For characters to prove themselves as men. And I think that that's manifesting itself towards AJ.
Yeah.
Like what Tony wants is now, the result in part is that AJ is going to military school, dressing up and like proving himself that way.
Yeah.
Now we know that it's a bit of a farce. Like, we know that character and we know that it's, like, a business and this is kind of a creation. And we saw him on set and we know that this, like, ideal that people are chasing is also kind of, like, not real in a lot of ways.
Huge penises.
It's not about that. It's not about literally the huge penises.
Oh.
But it is about people proving themselves as men.
Right.
I think. Yeah. I think that's... I'm happy with that. It's an amazing episode. And an amazing season.
Yeah, a really amazing season. I mean, like, yeah.
Maybe my favorite so far.
Yeah.
On this viewing, at least.
Like, there's all sorts of lists of, top seasons. And Alex was saying to me earlier today, like, a lot of people put season 3 as their favorite season. Like that,
yeah. There's a lot of, like, hits.
There are a lot of hits, and I think, like, maybe in past viewings, like, the hits stood out for me, but the season as a whole maybe didn't as much. Mm-hmm. But on this viewing, I really, like, again, maybe, like, every time I see it, I, like, figure out another thing, or, like, there's layers that are clearer to me than on my last viewing. But so maybe there's something about looking at the arc as a whole or something of this season, but I've really enjoyed this season.
Well, something that I find really fascinating about this season that I think is actually kind of, like, remarkable as a TV season is that, like, a lot of the other seasons are dominated by a primary antagonist.
Yeah.
And this one doesn't really have that. It kind of sets up Ralphie.
Yeah.
Then we kind of have, like, Jackie Jr. in the same way, but he's kind of like this tragic character.
Yeah.
So at the end of the season, who's our antagonist? I mean, Gloria kind of shows up, but I mean, all these people, like, nobody is really like an obvious villain.
Yeah.
And we have an obvious villain in most other seasons, and often, like,
I forgot that Ralphie. I mean, Ralphie's already really crazy. Don't get me wrong, but, like, I forgot that he'll
get crazier.
He gets crazier. Yeah.
And I think with a lot of shows, like, I tend to think of seasons defined with a kind of, like, elevator pitch, or, like, just like a very kind of, like,
what happens in Sopranos season 3?
Like, when I think about, like, The Wire or something, it's like, okay,
well,
like, one is like the drug trade in Baltimore, 2 is like how it gets there,
the shipping lanes,
it's like, we have education, we have media, it's like very clear. And in this season, in some ways, it's similar. We have, like, we have, like, Tony is in therapy and his mother wants to whack him, basically, to, like, sum it up. And Livia, we have Livia as a character. We have Big Pussy kind of showing up as, like, a major threat.
Yeah.
But, like, who is the threat in this one? And we have that later on, too. There is, like, a threat.
Yep.
And so it's an interesting season. It's one that actually maybe I would kind of, like, mix up with the next, with 3 and 4 can kind of, like, be interchanged, because Ralphie exists in both. In 2, we had Richie. Right? Who's, like, kind of like an antagonist. And now we have Ralphie, but Ralphie kind of, like, goes over the boundary of a season.
Yeah.
So it's just, like, I find it remarkable that they don't kind of fall into these tropes, and the season doesn't kind of rely on that primary antagonist.
No, I know. It stands out for me a lot. I think maybe because of that, and, like, it's just, to the credit of the writers and everyone involved in the show, it's like you can make a show that has these hard-hitting episodes, like, again, some of the best episodes are in this season too, and then have a season that, like, doesn't rely on anything traditional about TV. Yeah. Right? Like, and so it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. But
so thank you for listening.
Thank you. So if you're listening to this in real time, we'll be back in, like, a week and a half, probably.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. It's going to be 2019, and that's going to be a good year.
Yeah. We can't wait to talk about more Sopranos with you then.
January is going to be a good time for recording.
It's a great time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Bye.